For centuries it appeared on maps, a small, uninhabited island sitting quietly in the Gulf of Mexico. Sailors charted around it, cartographers documented it, and naval records treated it as a fixed and unquestioned landmark. Its name was Bermeja, a modest stretch of land, insignificant at first glance, yet consistent and persistent enough in maritime records to become part of geographical reality. It was there, or at least, every credible source insisted that it was. Then, sometime in the late 20th century, everything changed. Bermeja Island vanished. When modern satellite technology advanced, when governments began scanning coastlines and maritime borders with high-resolution imaging, a request was made to confirm its exact coordinates once and for all. Survey vessels sailed toward its recorded location. Aircraft passed overhead. Satellite passes were logged, analyzed, rechecked. They all returned with the same impossible result. Nothing. No landmass. No reef. No submerged shelf. No trace of erosion. No indication that an island had ever existed there at all. The ocean was empty. And that absence, that quiet piece of water where a documented island was supposed to be, would ignite one of the most unsettling geopolitical mysteries in modern maritime history. Because Bermeja wasn't just a forgotten rock on a map. It was tied to territory. It was tied to oil. It was tied to international negotiations and economic power. And when it disappeared, questions began to surface. Questions that many believed someone, somewhere, did not want answered. The story of Bermeja begins long before satellites, long before oil concessions, long before modern borders existed in their current form. Early Spanish maps depicted the island clearly, its name appearing again and again, copied from chart to chart as explorers refined the geography of the New World. Historians traced references back to the 16th century, when navigators described a pale, sandy landmass rising slightly above the surrounding waters. The name, Bermeja, itself was believed to refer to a reddish tint in the surrounding rocks or soil, a descriptive marker common in early exploration accounts. Over time, the island appears consistently across official atlases, maritime logs, and naval charts. Generations of mapmakers reproduced it, and government records from Mexico acknowledged it as part of national territory. In an era where mapping errors were common, Bermeja was notably persistent. It was not a mythic island scribbled by rumor, not a speculative shape drawn from hearsay, but a stable entry on authoritative documents. So when the first doubts arose, they were not about whether Bermeja had ever existed, but rather about what might have happened to it. In the late 1990s, as Mexico and the United States began redefining maritime boundaries in the Gulf of Mexico, attention turned to offshore resources, specifically oil reserves beneath the seabed. These negotiations were highly technical, tightly controlled, and enormously consequential. Billions of dollars, perhaps more, depended on where the borders were drawn. And Bermeja, sitting near that boundary, suddenly became very important. Under maritime law, islands can extend a nation's exclusive economic zone. If Bermeja existed, Mexico's territorial claim would stretch farther, granting broader access to offshore oil fields and resource rights. If it didn't exist, the boundary line shifted, and those resources might fall within shared or foreign-controlled zones. So the question wasn't just about geography, it was about ownership. In this context, Mexican authorities initiated surveys to reconfirm the island's exact position, a routine step in theory. Research vessels navigated to the historical coordinates. Teams scanned the sea surface. Hydrographic instruments probed the depths. Satellite imagery was consulted to detect even the faintest evidence of a landmass. They found nothing. Reports returned with stark language. No island present, no reef platform, no submerged geological formation consistent with erosion of a former island. It was as if Bermeja had never been real at all. But that conclusion conflicted not just with centuries of cartography, but with local stories, archived documents, and scattered anecdotal accounts from sailors who swore that older navigational routes accounted for it. Confusion turned to suspicion. Internal documents referenced territorial disputes. Others referenced oil reserves. A few contained darker phrases, classified naval activity, restricted maritime operations, confidential agreements. None explicitly addressed Bermeja's disappearance, but to observers the context felt far from coincidental. Independent researchers began digging through map archives, tracing every historical reference to Bermeja they could find. They compared coordinates from different centuries, mapped alignments, and examined whether the island could have shifted positions through mismeasurement. Some geographers argued that early explorers might have mistaken another formation, that copy errors perpetuated a phantom island across generations of charts. But others rejected that explanation. They argued that too many official records placed the island too consistently for it to be a simple mistake. They pointed to testimonies claiming that naval forces had operated near its vicinity during periods of strategic military activity. Theories emerged, not all credible but persistent, suggesting that Bermeja might have been removed deliberately, whether physically altered, politically erased, or reclassified under secrecy. One theory proposed that rising sea levels had gradually submerged the island until it disappeared below the surface, leaving no visible trace. But geologists challenged that notion, noting that such subsidence should have left underwater evidence. A rock base, a shallow platform, some indication of structural collapse. Yet surveys reported only deep, uninterrupted water. Another theory suggested that the island had never existed, that it was born through cartographic duplication. A simple error repeated across centuries, taking on false legitimacy through repetition. However, critics countered that many phantom islands were eventually corrected by later map revisions, while Bermeja persisted far longer and appeared in credible naval records rather than speculative charts. Then came the most controversial theory, that Bermeja was removed not by nature or error, but by intentional intervention. Supporters of this idea pointed to the timing of its disappearance, coinciding with resource negotiations and shifting maritime boundaries. They argued that if Bermeja could no longer be verified, its absence would weaken certain territorial claims and influence the distribution of offshore oil zones. Some speculated about covert demolition operations, citing the existence of classified military programs in unrelated contexts where geological structures were altered. There is no confirmed evidence supporting this theory, but its persistence reflects the unease surrounding the case. The disappearance of an island is not a trivial event. Landmasses do not simply dissolve without geological trace. When something that was recorded, mapped, and administratively acknowledged for centuries is suddenly declared non-existent, distrust grows naturally. People question whether truth was lost or deliberately buried. Journalists pursued the story, interviewing academics, maritime historians, former naval officials, and residents familiar with coastal lore. A pattern emerged, a sense that Bermeja had existed in the collective geographic consciousness for so long that its erasure felt abrupt and unsettling. Some local voices spoke of inherited stories, references passed through generations of sailors who knew the waters intimately. Others warned that conspiratorial interpretations risked overshadowing more mundane explanations, such as mapping inaccuracy or mistaken identity. But even these skeptics acknowledged that the political stakes surrounding the island complicated efforts to settle the debate objectively. The truth, even now, remains unresolved. Bermeja exists in a strange limbo, simultaneously historical and absent, recorded yet unverified, present in memory but erased from reality. It stands at the intersection of cartography, geopolitics, economics, and secrecy. Its disappearance is not just a geographical mystery, it is a reminder of how human perception, institutional authority, and strategic interests can converge to reshape what we accept as real. In the end, one question remains suspended above the empty waters where Bermeja was once drawn. Was the island ever truly there, or was it removed from existence for reasons that go far beyond the map? And if it was erased, who did it and why? Because sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are not the ones we fail to discover, but the ones that were once there, and are no longer allowed to be. They called it an island that should not exist, a place sailors swore they had seen with their own eyes, but could never prove was real. An island that appeared on the horizon like a ghost rising from the sea, then vanished as if swallowed by the mist. For centuries, navigators charted it, monks wrote about it, explorers claimed they landed on it, and one crew said they walked deep into its forest, only to return to the shore and discover that their ship, their only way back to the world they knew, was gone. This is the story of San Borondón, the phantom island of the Atlantic, the island that moves, the island that disappears, the island that refuses to be mapped, and the island that, according to one surviving account, took a crew of men and never gave them back. There are legends, and there are navigational mysteries, San Borondón exists somewhere in between. The earliest records describe it not as myth, but as geography. It appears in medieval atlases beside the Canary Islands, a long dark landmass, just beyond the horizon. Sailors wrote of dense forests, jagged cliffs, hills cloaked in permanent cloud. Some said it was a refuge. Others warned it was a trap. They claimed the island only appeared under certain conditions. When the sea was calm, the air heavy, and the sky white with fog. From a distance, it looked solid, permanent, undeniable. But as ships approached, its shoreline drifted away, as if the island itself was moving. Captains blamed mirages. Religious scholars called it divine illusion. Yet voyage logs continued to insist San Borondón was real. And in 1759, one crew claimed they reached it. They were merchant sailors traveling along the Atlantic corridor near the Canary region, a route well known for unpredictable currents and sudden weather changes. The men reported spotting land where none should exist, a long peninsula-shaped silhouette rising out of a bed of fog. The helmsman said it appeared slowly, as if emerging from beneath the surface of the water. The captain, skeptical at first, ordered the ship toward it. To his surprise, the closer they sailed, the clearer it became. They could see ridges, ravines, and dark pines stretching across hillsides. This was no cloud illusion, no fragment of coastline, no drifting bank of fog. It was land, and not just land, but an island that matched descriptions, recorded in charts more than a century old. Against every instinct of caution, they anchored offshore. The tide was weak, the sky silent, the water still. The air felt heavy, as though the island was holding its breath. A landing party was formed. They took torches, ropes, navigation tools. The captain remained aboard with a skeleton crew, while the rest climbed into rowboats and crossed the narrow stretch of water to the island's rocky edge. They said the moment their boots touched shore, everything went quiet. Not ordinary quiet, but an unnatural silence, like the world around them was suspended. No birds, no insects, no wind, only the sound of their own footsteps, pressing into damp soil. The men advanced inland. The terrain was dense and unfamiliar, towering trees rising from mist-covered ground, roots twisting through stone like veins. The deeper they walked, the stranger the world felt around them. The light dimmed, filtered through a ceiling of ancient branches. The air smelled like wet earth and salt. Several men later described the same sensation, as if they were being watched, not by animals, but by the island itself. Time became hard to measure. They moved cautiously, marking trees with blades, dropping rope lengths along their route. Standard expedition protocol. But at some point, those markers disappeared. Knots of rope they swore they had placed were gone. Tree markings scratched into bark had vanished. Paths they believed they had just walked no longer existed. The ground seemed to shift between steps, and the forest felt like it was rearranging around them. One man insisted that no matter which direction they turned, they ended up walking uphill. Another claimed the landscape folded inward, pulling them back toward the island's center. What began as exploration slowly turned to fear. Still they pressed on, because men of the sea are stubborn, because they believed discovery mattered more than doubt, because they were certain that no island could think. Eventually they decided to return to shore. The captain was expecting them. The tide would change soon. They retraced their route, or at least what they believed was their route. Branches snapped beneath their feet. Fog thickened. The tree line thinned, until finally, they saw open sky. They emerged from the forest onto a cliffed coastline. The beach below them curved into a gentle bay. Waves rolled slowly in. Everything seemed calm, almost peaceful. They scanned the shoreline, searching for their anchor point, their rowboats, their ship. What they saw instead was nothing. No mast, no rigging, no sails. The waters where their ship should have been were empty. The bay was silent. Their vessel was gone. At first they thought they were in the wrong place. Maybe they had emerged from the forest on the wrong side of the island. Maybe the fog distorted distances. Maybe the current had shifted the ship around the headland. So they shouted. They waved torches. They ran along the ridge shouting names into the wind. No one answered. They descended to the shoreline. boots sinking into damp sand, and stared out into the open water. Still nothing. Only the slow curl of waves. The island felt colder now. The mist had thickened, drifting low across the water like a living wall. A few men argued. Some believed the ship had cut anchor in emergency. Others feared something worse. But every theory shared one problem. There had been no storm, no wind, no sound, nothing that would force a vessel to flee. And even if it had, why leave without the landing party? As they debated, another detail emerged. The tide line had moved. The rock they had used as a reference point when landing now sat partially underwater, as if the island itself had shifted beneath their feet. Some swore the coastline curve was different than before. The men began to panic, because this was not just a missing ship. This was something else, something they did not have words for. The fog crept closer, thicker, heavier, swallowing the horizon. And slowly, the island began to fade with it. Not disappear instantly, but dissolve, piece by piece, as if reality itself was thinning. The men felt the ground tremble beneath them. The air grew colder. And then, the shoreline, the cliffs, the forest behind them, all began to vanish into the mist. They ran. They screamed. They begged the island to hold still. Two men managed to scramble onto floating debris, pieces of wood scattered near the tide, and pushed themselves desperately toward the open sea. They drifted for hours. By the time the fog thinned, San Borondón was gone. Only open water remained. The rest of the landing party was never seen again. Weeks later, the two survivors were rescued by a passing vessel, dehydrated, delirious, and sunburned. Their minds fractured between memory and terror. But their stories remained consistent. They had walked on land. They had moved through forests. They had stood on a shoreline and watched their world disappear. They described the same vanishing coastline, the same unnatural silence, the same sensation that the island was alive, and choosing who could leave. When they were questioned by authorities, their accounts were dismissed as fatigue, exposure, hallucination brought on by stress. But sailors believed them, because other crews had seen the same island across history, appearing in the distance, then disappearing when approached, always in the same region, always in the same position, just beyond the edge of the known world. Mapmakers argued over its existence for centuries. Some atlases printed it, others erased it. Governments debated whether to claim it or ignore it entirely. But one phrase from the survivors' testimony endured longer than any chart or document. They described their missing companions as lost to an island that does not exist. Not shipwrecked, not drowned, not taken by storm. Lost to something nameless, something that leaves no trace, something that appears only when it wants to be seen, and disappears before the world can prove it was ever there. Today, San Borondón remains one of the most persistent geographic mysteries in maritime history. A phantom island, a cartographic ghost, a place that refuses to choose between legend and reality. Some say it was an illusion of light. Some say it was a misidentified coastline. Some say it was never there at all. But sailors still whisper about it. The island in the fog, the land that moves, the place where men step ashore and never return. Because whether San Borondón is real or not, one fact remains. Two men came back and swore they had walked upon it, and the rest of their crew are still out there, somewhere, lost to an island that does not exist. If you enjoyed this story and want more real unexplained mysteries like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this series continue and makes sure you never miss the next case.